I think I'm kind of a magpie as far as where the images, if you'd like to call them that, come from. I mean, I sort of pick and choose from everywhere. And, for abstract painting, I think that's fairly typical of a lot of abstract painters. But I guess my belief for my own work is that, whether it's a kind of natural source or very unnatural, that somehow they can be shaped or molded into an equivalence. So, I sometimes will look at, a TV program or some kind of something on TV that strikes me, and be it a visual thing or an actual image, and that may become incorporated in the work in some fashion. It could be a pattern, it could be a certain kind of light effect, and that can sort of mix and evolve with other snippets of information that I kind of glean from elsewhere. There's no real hierarchy of images, for instance, so I don't know, I think I'm trying to create overall a work that looks like it belongs to now, in that it has a sort of contemporary quality about it, like it couldn't come from 1962 or whatever. I mean, to me, I'm not concerned about too much about what they look like, just that they act in a certain way. And I think that they can just as easily be, a hole through an interior wall that leads to another space, or they can be a kind of illusionistic space that you might find on the computer, a gaming space perhaps. And yet, it also has, I mean, being a painter, I'm also interested in just the act of painting, so I try and keep that as an issue in the work as well, and kind of try and create a work that has a contemporary feel to it, and yet references other, maybe more art historical works in some fashion or another. Yeah, so the influences are everywhere, really, and I sort of work with things on the computer first, and kind of just make these rough sketches that incorporate any ideas or sort of visual ideas up to that point, and then go ahead and make a work once I feel that all the elements have kind of settled into a sort of overall sense of being, I think, in the picture space. And there's usually not any kind of dominance in the work as far as one area over another, depending on the color. I think there's more of an equivalence in the work. I start with a computer sketch first. Generally, I work out most of the underlying composition that way, and maybe do a few works on paper just to kind of familiarize myself with the color that I'm going to be using and the techniques that I might use. It doesn't evolve in a traditional sense, in that a painting would maybe start with a ground and then an underpainting, and then various layers would go on top of that until maybe a few details at the very end, and I have to kind of construct them in a way that they sort of happen over time, piece by piece. So I always think of them as kind of like prefabricated structures, buildings, in the sense that they're put together part by part, rather than, you know, thinking of it as a whole from the start. It really depends what area needs to go first, depending on the color. So if I want a very sort of saturated color in one area, and it's the kind of color that needs, you know, a white ground behind it to keep its intensity, then I would start with areas like that, and then gradually build up more opaque layers over that. You know, I think in the past my work's been a lot more hard-edged and crisp and sort of modular in a sense. And you know, in the last few years I think I've been allowing myself to move on from that and create these situations where I can be a bit more improvisational and a bit more painterly. I want the work to be somewhat, or to, you know, have a sense of a kind of random quality to it, as well as it being very controlled. I think those two elements, you know, I find myself thinking that they should be played off against each other more. One Desert Robot is really what I meant earlier by the painting being kind of modular and kind of almost like, you could say, decals on a flat surface, a lot of it. I was using, you know, the white ground of the canvas as part of the painting, and sort of experimenting with how much of the white would stay or remain, and how much would get covered. So in that particular case, and again, as far as process, I had to know pretty much exactly where the other shapes were going to go in the composition, so that the white would be left untouched. So there isn't really much of a procedure where, you know, you would paint something and necessarily repaint it over. During that period, you know, the work didn't really allow me to do much kind of layering or correction, actually. So moving on from there, you know, I think that that painting at least retains a sense of kind of a perfectionism about it, in that it's very, the edges are very sharp and delineated, and there isn't much of a sense of a kind of play in that work. I think it was very much, you know, constructed part by part. So moving on from there, split plate, I think, was a kind of in-between painting, really, from the older work to the newer work that I've been doing recently. And of course, you know, it retains the white ground again. I think I had been working on, you know, works on paper up to that point. And on the left side of the painting, that was an area which I kind of had figured out without the aid of a computer, as far as how I made it. And I wanted to use paint, you know, in a different way for me. I'd kind of been a little tired of sitting there using an X-Acto knife with tape and, you know, filling in areas. So I wanted at least one area of the painting to be somewhat more free and open. So I allowed myself to kind of, you know, put the painting on the floor and kind of pour paint onto it and manipulate that paint in a very different way. And I had really thought about that painting being one that would demonstrate, you know, two very different qualities in the same work. So the big orange-red shape on the right side was kind of this flat, almost sort of color field approach next to the more playful or random section on the left. And rather than try and integrate the two, I simply, cut the middle of the painting and place them together so that they would form a whole shape rather than two separate ones. But I think, the way the composition is, it reads as two separate parts anyway. It's kind of a back and forth between wholeness and, division, I think. Then with the painting Go-Between, I had set myself the task of not using the computer so readily, and I think that the painting Go-Between was one of the paintings that came out of that period of time. And one thing that I had to do really was to eliminate the white ground so that I could kind of give myself the chance to work over areas that perhaps I didn't like or I didn't feel like they were working. Again, it's sort of a painting that's divided into two parts, the strip at the top and then the section at the bottom. In this particular case, the colours at the top are quite vibrant, and I wanted them to be a sort of hazy, blurry atmosphere, so those were put on first with an airbrush, and then the section underneath that came afterwards, obviously. And I started with, just a very sort of overall black area, work some paint marks and drips and some sort of printing techniques into that area, and then sort of framed it in a way with paint over the top of that to form this kind of opening in the space. And the works on paper are really ongoing studies that I do during a painting like Go-Between. Working on paper is somewhat limited in that it's a much more fragile surface, and I can't do as much on paper as I can with canvas, but doing those really helped me to move away from the computer somewhat and in effect be more direct, I think, and not feel like I had to sort of cram everything into one painting. So, some of them look like details from paintings. Others actually were worked up into larger works. And I think that it's always been important in my work to create some kind of depth that feels like it can contain other things, and it just feels a much more active space to me, which sort of excites me more than I think if it was just a flat surface or some kind of more of a gestural surface. Well, I think we're all familiar with the idea that perhaps we glance, let's say we lose track of a certain kind of thing we might be thinking of doing or saying, and just in terms of the visual, I think we've all felt that feeling of looking at something and suddenly that thing can look very different than what it actually is. It's not, so much that it's a hallucination, but I think, sometimes we mistake a certain situation for something that it actually isn't. The way that maybe, we're out for a walk and something at the end of the street suddenly appears like something that we recognize. The closer we get, obviously it's, just a lamppost or something with a sign on it. And, that's something that interests me in terms of how we can sort of mistakenly adapt our vision or our thought in a way that we're sort of constantly surprising ourselves. Maybe it's becoming older, but for some reason, I'm much more aware than I used to be, I think, of not really understanding what I'm seeing sometimes. And, particularly, as an example, I think that there are certain times of the day where the light or the color kind of rearrange our expectations of the world around us. As a specific example, just the other day I was downtown, and for some reason the sky looked flatter than the building that was in it, and I think it was just a certain point where the value color-wise of the building actually was the same value as the sky, so it kind of didn't have, there wasn't a sense of space between the two. The building, we would expect the sky to appear infinite, but in that moment it looked flatter. So it's sort of experiences like that other times, I don't know, I'm trying to think of examples, but I think it happens when you're not thinking so much as you just kind of look very quickly at something, and you're taken aback by how rearranged it looks, how the order of things don't match up to our expectation of it.